Hello and welcome back to Earth Ash with Red Sun. So, we start off where, after gaining all 8 gym badges and defeating Blue Oak, he'll decide to go and visit Planet Town. So Ash will come across Gary and Professor Oak as Gary be flexing all of his Pokemon to his grandpa. Professor Oak would be calmly impressed and wouldn't be laughing all about it, saying, yes, Gary, overpraising him because years back, Ash's father Red had already caught all of the Pokemon in the Pokedex other than a few exceptions, so it wasn't too big of a deal. So then, when Ash and Brock made themselves known, the tone changed significantly, and I'm talking about for Gary. It changed to be a serious and intense tone, as Gary wasn't very well thrilled to see Ash, as the last time that him and Ash had a Pokemon battle was interrupted and he kind of chickened out of the last battle after Ash's Charmeleon evolved, so he wasn't really ready to face Ash again. But but there was a part of him that was like, put this loser in his place. As then Ash and Brock will greet Professor Oak, and Professor Oak would then say, Ash, I see you got a new friend with you. As then Brock would say, yeah, I'm Ash's friend. As then Gary would hear the small talk but wouldn't participate at all. But after a while he'll get tired and would just say, Ash, I want to have a battle with you. And I want us to choose 3 of our favourite Pokemon. They are stronger Pokemon. You have strong Pokemon, right? And then Ash would say that he has strong Pokemon. And Gary would say he also does, and he wants the both of them to choose Pokemon. Like any 3 Pokemon. As then Ash would send out Graveler and Gary would send out Golem. Gary would then say, oh Ashy boy, looks like you didn't evolve your Graveler. Let's see how it fares against my Golem. As then both of them would use a rollout. They'd keep rolling towards each other and the moves would be rolling and rolling and rolling. But then they would continue to roll on and on and on until they knock each other back for decent damage. As then Ash would call for an earthquake, which would do a lot of damage. As then Golem would call for an earthquake, which would do a lot of damage too. As then Ash would call for a rock blast, which would surround and hurt Golem a decent amount. As then he'd cover it in a rock tomb. As then he'd use an earthquake, which would knock out Golem, which would shock Gary. As then he'd say, wait, you beat my Golem with your Graveler using a rock moves and an earthquake. And then Ash would say, yeah, it's strategies I've been working out with Graveler. As then Gary would send out Arcanine. Ash would think that Gary wasn't being very smart by sending out a fire type to face a rock and ground type. But he'd immediately prove Ash wrong and lead off with a powerful flamethrower, which would immediately take down Graveler, as Golem had done a lot more damage on it than Ash had thought. As then Ash would send out Golduck for the attack advantage. As then they'd clash with extreme speed and slash. As then Golduck would go on to respond with a water pulse. As then Arcanine would use a flamethrower, which would do decent damage. As then Golduck would be burnt, as the burn would afflict Golduck, as it would then respond with a Hydro Pump, knocking out Arcanine. As then Gary would send out Blastoise. As then, Golduck would use Psychic to blast away Blastoise. As then, it would go in for a slash, but it would do little to no damage. As then, Blastoise would respond with a Mega Punch which would knock it out. As then, Ash would send out Charizard. As then Gary would say, I've been waiting for this one. As then Blastoise would also look keen to battle Charizard. As then Ash would call for a Dragon Pulse, which would hit Blastoise for a lot of damage. As then Blastoise would try to go for a Hydro Pump, which Charizard would fly above to avoid. As then Ash would call for a Dragon Claw, as it would then slash on Blastoise and do a decent amount of damage. As then Blastoise would go for a point blank Hydro Pump. As then Charizard would be knocked back. Instead it would come with a Fire Fang, and Blastoise would clash with a Mega Punch. Both moves would collide. As then it would knock back both Pokemon for even damage. Ash would then call for a Dragon Pulse and Blastoise with a Hydro Pump. Both moves would clash for hours and hours for a long time. At one point it looked like Dragon Pulse had ground, and the next it looked like Hydro Pump had ground. But after a long while, both moves would begin to cause a massive explosion. As then the explosion hit both sides of the battlefield, hitting the Pokemon and the trainers. As then a massive bluish and purplish explosion would go on. As then both trainers were knocked out, but Charizard was standing victorious over a knocked out Blastoise, showing that Ash had won the battle. Both trainers would get up and then notice Ash's victory. Gary would be very embarrassed, to say the least, as he'd spent hours upon hours training to evolve his Blastoise and to make all of his Pokemon stronger to beat Ash. And Ash was just super happy as his strongest Pokemon, had beaten Gary's strongest. And he was happy at how strong he was. But Gary would then say, Ash, a deal is a deal. Since your Graveler beat my Golem, I think it's time that I evolve your Graveler. As then, Oak could direct them to a nearby trading machine in the Pokemon Center. As then, they trade using the machine, as the Graveler would grow, as it would evolve into Golem, showing the transition. As then, Ash would decide to do training with all his Pokemon, as he'd then start off with Golem. As then, Golem would start off with a rollout. As then, Charizard would start off with a flamethrower. As then, a few months later, we would see that Ash had finished all his training, and that all of our main characters would be ready for the Indigo Plateau or the Indigo League. And Golem would solo through all of the first rounds, as after evolving it became very strong. And Gary would actually win against that random trainer of the Golem, as Nidoking would actually defeat the trainer with the Golem, showing that Gary was the far superior trainer. And I'd just like to bring up Kanto's current champion, Red Ketchum. Red would be here as he wanted to watch his son and see how he progresses, and he wanted to see the Indigo Plateau play out, as it had been a few years since he'd seen the Indigo Plateau go. And the last time he'd been, it was one of the most bland festivals or bland events he'd ever seen, as the trainer who won was defeated by only a single Pokemon from Lorelei. As then, we skip to Ash versus Richie, as like I said earlier, Golem had soloed through all the preliminaries and all that stuff. As then Ash would use Fearer against Butterfree, and Butterfree would try and go for a side beam, but Fearer would avoid it and then use an aerial ace which would knock out Butterfree. As then Richie would send out his Pikachu Sparky, as then Sparky would charge up electricity, and then it would use a quick attack which would shock Fearer, as then Fearer responds with a Fury attack and hit it with lots of beaks, as then Pikachu would be knocked back, as then it would shock it to submission with a Thunderbolt, knocking out Fearer, as then Ash would send out Golem, as he would call for one Earthquake which would knock out Sparky, as then Richie, not having any other choices as this was his strongest Pokemon, would send out Zippo, his Charmander, as then he'd call for Flamethrower, which wouldn't do much, as then Ash would call for one Rock Blast, which would instantly knock out Zippo, as then, even though Richie was absolutely annihilated, it wasn't a close battle, he'd recognise that Ash was the better trainer, and it would be rude to deny Ash the credit he deserves, so he'd come and shake Ash's hand, saying that he truly is strong, and truly is the son of the champion. As then we'd see a mysterious boy who was the son of Johto's most recent champion, Gold. Even though people call him Ethan, I'm just going to call the guy Gold, because, you know, like in the original games, it was called Gold, and also, like in most of, like when I search up in like Bulbapedia and Bulba Garden, like, because I'm trying to use sources to make what if as accurate as possible, yeah, like in most of the like medias of Pokemon that he's been shown in, they call him Gold. Yeah, so I'm just gonna call the guy Gold, and if you guys want to call him Ethan, call him Ethan. I'm not gonna just stand here and tell you what you want to call someone who's not even real. So, Jimmy, the son of Gold, who had been soloing the entire tournament of Justice Typhlosion, would be up against Asunta's Tentacle, as Typhlosion had defeated all of Asunta's team. As then Tentacruel would glow out of determination to win Frost Trainer and evolve into Tentacruel. As then Tentacruel would be annihilated with a flamethrower before it could ever do anything, showing the speed and power of Typhlosion. As then it would be Ash versus Jimmy. Ash would use Raichu against Jimmy's Beedrill, as then Beedrill would go for a poison jab, but then Raichu would jump up and use a Thunderbolt, as then it would go in for a quick attack, which would knock back Beedrill, as then Beedrill would bombard it with multiple pin missiles, as then they'd all hit Raichu multiple times and do a lot of damage, as then Raichu would then use a Thunder attack while it was landing, which would defeat Beedrill, as then Jimmy would send out Domfan. Anyway, nothing to say. In like the Zoroark movie, was it? I don't really remember, but in one of the movies, a trainer who looked exactly like Gold or Jimmy battled Ash with a Domfan. And for the sake of my what if, yeah, I'm just gonna say that that trainer was Jimmy and there's a Domfan. And I also think that him having a Domfan would make a lot of sense as he's from Johto, and also it's a Pokemon that I think would personally suit the character of Gold very much, and also the person who used it literally looked exactly like Jimmy or Gold, and the anime version of like Gold is Jimmy, and also in the movie it was an anime movie, not any of this Like it wasn't like Pokemon Origins, and also in this story, a lot of the counterparts are children of like the anime counterparts are children of the game counterparts or vice versa, as I might flip some things up. I don't know yet. I haven't completely came up and gotten this story done. I'm still forming everything into place. But anyway, let me just go into the battle. I don't want to rant all day or all night because I'm recording this late night. Anyway, I should call for a quick attack as Jerry call for a rollout. As then both moves will collide for a long time as quick attack will try and gain ground against Donphan's rollout. As then both Pokemon would disperse as Raichu would jump up into the air, as then it would use a slam with its tail and would land the move on Donphan, as the Donphan would come with a horn attack. But then Ash would tell his Raichu to slide under Donphan, as then it would wrap its tail around Donphan's leg, as then Donphan, realizing what was about to happen, would make the ground split in half, as then an earthquake would begin going on, as then Ash would chuck his Raichu at would chuck Donphan with such velocity that Donphan immediately fainted, as then Raichu was enveloped by the earthquake, as then Donphan hit the wall of the stadium and Raichu was enveloped in the earthquake, which will cause a double knockout, as then Jill would say, I'm not gonna lie, Ash. I thought it was a bit stupid sending out or letting a Raichu go up against a Donphan. But then Ash would say, you know me, and my reasons, and my strategies, I'm not a stupid trainer. As then Jill would say, now the real battle begins. As then he'd send out Typhlosion and Ash would send out Golduck. As then Typhlosion would use a Thunder Punch, but before it would come towards Golduck, it would use a Hydro Pump, which would do a lot of damage. As then Jimmy would take the initiative with in his left hand a Fire Punch and in his right hand a Thunder Punch. As then Golduck would call for Slash, as then both moves would collide and hit Pokemon for even damage, as they'd slash and punch the living daylights out of each other, which would do a lot of damage to both sides, especially Golduck, as was on another end of a super effective move. As then Golduck would use a Water Pulse, which would knock back Typhlosion. Typhlosion would use two Thunder Punch fists, as then before they could hit exactly, Golduck would grab its arms, would use psychic energy around its arms, rendering them useless. As then the thunder would go away, as then it would wrap its entire body in psychic energy and blast it far, far onto the stadium walls, smashing it on the walls. As then it would smash it it would throw it far into the sky and into space and then knock it back down onto the floor. As then Typhlosion would be very hurt from the psychic. As then when the Golduck went for another round, its eyes would glow a fiery aura, as then fire aura would envelop it, as the psychic aura would be broken away and would knock back Golduck, as it would be in its blaze ability. As then Golduck would Ash would call for a Hydro Pump, as then Jimmy would call for a Flamethrower. Even though usually Hydro Pump would win in a few minutes, the enhanced blaze was making it harder for Ash. So this clash would go on for a while until Golduck, after a long while, overpowered Jimmy's Typhlosion with a Hydro Pump, which would defeat Jimmy. As then Jimmy would look at Ash with respect. As then he'd come and shake his hand, saying, "Wow, you really are a good trainer. And I enjoyed that battle. I think you should come to Johto sometime, my home region. I think you would like it, and I think you'd like the Pokemon League over there. I took part in the Pokemon League in Johto. I was the favorite to win, but I didn't win. Instead, some annoying kid with red hair won. As then, I should say, well, sometimes it's just the luck of the tournament. As then, Drew would say, I hope that doesn't happen to you. I hope someone doesn't waltz in and just, I hope like one of your rivals doesn't just waltz in and just steal away your victory. Because I had that guy, but he just used some cheap tricks or something and he won. As then, Ash would ask how this dude looked like, as then he'd say, red hair, grey, dark silvery grey eyes. And he wears like a dark jacket and some dark or and some dark trousers or occasionally white trousers. Remember, red hair, as then I should say. Okay, I'll look out for that guy in Johto. As then, before his battle with Gary in the finals, Ash would decide to do some special training with Firo as he hadn't really given it much attention recently, so he wanted it to be ready for the finals. So it would be Ash versus Gary. It would be a repeat, as then of not exactly a repeat, but essentially part 2 or part 3 of of Red versus Blue. This is the match that really took Red's attention. Even though he was interested in the match with Jimmy, this one is what really got Red on the edge of his seat and paying attention, as he was invested in this match. As then it would start with Firo and Arcanine. It would start with Air Release and Flame Wheel. Both moves would collide and would cause even damage on both sides. As then, after being knocked back, Firo would have a Fire Blast sent towards it immediately. But as it was about to home in, Firo would use a Hyper Beam and would knock back Arcanine, revealing this to be what him and Ash were working on. As then, Gary would say, Hyper Beam? You taught Hyper Beam? As then Ash would say, yeah. Why'd you prepare it for this battle? As then, Firo would be recharging. As then, Arcanine would go for an extreme speed and would knock back Firo. As then, Firo would go from under and would use a Drill Peck, which would knock back Arcanine. As then, Firo would try and finish off with an Air Release, but then Arcanine would use a Flamethrower. As then, when the dust settled, Arcanine was down, but it left Firo with a burn. As then, Gary would send out his Nidoking, and Nidoking would use one Mega Punch, which would do a lot of damage. As then, Firo would respond with a Hyper Beam. As then, Nidoking would tank the attack. As then, its horn would glow with electricity. As then, electricity would surround Nidoking. As then, Ash would know what was about to happen. As then, he tried to tell Firo to fly away and try and avoid the attack, but it was too late. As then, Nidoking would use an intensely powerful Thunder attack, which would instantly knock out Firo. As then, Ash would ask how Nidoking knows that, and then Gary would say he did the exact same thing that Ash did. He prepared one of his other Pokemon for the battle with Ash, as he wants to win today, and he's going home with that first place trophy, and he's going to beat Red Ketchum, Ash's dad. As then, the determination in his eyes, in Gary's eyes, reminds Red of the determination you used to see in Blue's eyes when he kept having speeches of finally beating him and becoming champion when he re-challenged him for the title. As then, Ash would use Raichu, as then Raichu would use a quick attack and would knock it back. As then Gary would say, "What are you gonna do with a Raichu against a ground type like my Nidoking?" As then Ash would then say, "You'll see." As then he'd call for it to use a slam. As Raichu's devastating speed would confuse Nidoking. As then Ash would tell Raichu to jump back. As then Nidoking would miss a horn attack. As then he would call for a quick attack which would knock back Nidoking, as Raichu was way too fast for Nidoking. As then, similar to in the Sun and Moon anime when Ash was facing off against Kukui and his Incineroar, Ash and how Ash in like used Torracat and its flame charges to hit Incineroar a bunch and speed up Torracat, as Torracat was clearly the faster one and was able to land flame charges a bunch as it was faster and it was building up speed. So Ash would basically be using the same strategy as Ash would eventually use in Sun and Moon against Goku and his Incineroar with his Torracat. So he would hit Nidoking from above with a quick attack, as then would hit it all over with quick attacks, and then it would not finish off, but land a strong blow with a slam, which would leave Nidoking very disorientated, as then it would call for an earthquake, but Raichu would then jump up and then finish off with a slam, as then Gary would send out his Alakazam, as then he'd say, "This Pokemon, I rarely use this one. I only use it when battles are gonna get really, really intense." As then Ash would understand why he pulled out Alakazam. As then Alakazam would use a Psychic which would knock back Raichu, and then he'd smash it up into the sky and then it would knock it back down, as the Raichu would be so disoriented it couldn't activate much speed. As then eventually it would try to go for a quick attack, but it would quickly be avoided and then defeated with a Psybeam. As then Ash would send out Golem, as the Golem would use an Earthquake which would do a lot of damage. As then Alakazam would go for a Psybeam which would do a bunch of damage to Golem, but then Golem responds with Rock Blasts, which would do a lot of damage. But then Ash would call for a rollout, but Alakazam would form a barrier of rock fragments as it had been able to crush the rocks that had been trapping it, as it would form a psychic barrier made of rock shards, as then would be charged into with a rollout from Golem, as then both the rock shard barrier and the rollout would be clashing until the rock shard barrier fell apart and the rollout defeated Alakazam. As then Gary would send out Seadra, as then Golem would roll up into a boulder to try and resist the attack, as then Seadra would use a Hydro Pump, as then Golem would be resisting, but then the Hydro Pump would eventually defeat Golem, as then Ash would send out Ivysaur, as then Ivysaur would use a Razor Leaf which would knock back Seadra, as then Seadra would try to go for an Ice Beam, but Bulbasaur would avoid it with its vines and then would use its vines to whip Seadra, as then Seadra would be knocked out, as then would be Cypher versus Bulbasaur, as then Cypher would use Wing Attack which would do a lot of damage on Bulbasaur, so would use a lot of slashes too, so Bulbasaur would use a Solar Beam which would do decent damage, as then Cypher would finish off with a wing attack, as then Ash would send out Golduck, as then Golduck would use a water pulse, which would knock back Cypher, as then Cypher would go for a wing attack, which would knock back Golduck a bit, as then Golduck would use a Hydro Pump, which would immediately knock out Cypher, as then Gary would send out his infamous Blastoise, as then Blastoise would use a Mega Punch, which would clash with Golduck Slash, which would do decent damage to both sides, as then Ash would leave Blastoise with a Water Pulse, which would do some decent damage to it, and then both Pokemon would collide moves with Hydro Pumps, as then would be Golduck's Hydro Pump against Blastoise's double blasted Hydro Pumps. This clash would go on for a long time until it would cause a massive water vortex, which would hurt both Pokemon, and then when it settled, Blastoise would take the opportunity to hit Golduck square in the face with a Mega Punch, knocking it out, as then Ash would send out Charizard, and this is the part where Red would really be on the edge of his seat, as then he would remind him of his final showdown against Blue, and with his Charizard against Blue's Blastoise, as then Ash would call for a Flamethrower, as then Blastoise would go for 2 Mega Punches, as then Ash would go for Dragon Claws, as then this would go for a long while, as then Ash would go on and use a Dragon Pulse, which would knock back Blastoise, as then Ash would keep up the attack with the Dragon Claw, but then we'd see that Blastoise would use a Hydro Pump, which would blast Ash back, as then Blastoise and Ash would decide to go for a Dragon Pulse and a Hydro Pump, as then both moves would be trying to push each other back and overwhelm the opponent, as then Ash would have flashbacks about getting Charmander, getting as far as he has, and would think about what Jimmy told him about being stopped at the last moment and being beaten at the last moment, and thinking that he didn't want that to happen to him, as then Gary would think about how his brother Blue really wanted to beat Red but failed, and how if he wins he could make it all work and make the Oaks the strongest in Pallet Town. This clash would go for a long time, but eventually Blastoise would burn out faster, as then Dragon Pulse would overwhelm Blastoise and knock it out, proving that Ash was the strongest in Pallet Town. Even though Red was the strongest from Pallet Town, he wasn't really in Pallet Town that much. So Ash had became the strongest. Or so he thought, as there was a mystery trainer who might rival the Elite Four and the champions, who lay in Kanto. Someone who will be there to teach Ash all the time. Anyway, this mysterious individual will be revealed in the next part, as then Ash would congratulate Gary, and Gary would congratulate Ash, as then Gary, after losing to Ash so many times, had finally gotten humble and realised that Ash was the better trainer, and that he shouldn't always just battle Ash because he will win. He should battle Ash because it's fun, and Pokemon battles are fun. They're not always supposed to be won. They're always supposed to be a fun thing to do between 2 people and 2 Pokemon that want to do it. As then the ceremony would take place, as then Red would crown Ash the champion of the Indigo conference. Ash would crown Red would crown Ash the champion of the Indigo conference, or the winner, as then Red would say, "I knew you'd do it. this is the exact reason why I didn't pamper you at the beginning of your journey, so I could let you climb your own mountain and make your own journey here, all on your own. Doesn't it feel good? As then Ash would say, yes. As then I would say, what do you say, son? Will it take me and the Elite Four on right now or later? As then Ash would say, um, I think I don't really know. I'll go tell you later, Dad, when I make my choice. As then Red would say, I understand, son. As then Ash would get the first place trophy and Red would escort him and Red and Ash would both fly home on their Charizards. Anyway, guys, I really enjoyed making this part and it's going to be a premiere. I'm going to premiere it as this part took me long to make and it's going to be a premiere. Just going to say that. I'll see you guys later. Bye.